Good evening and welcome to the March 17th, 2015 regular Salem City Council meeting. It will now come to order. We'll have the invocation given by Father Steve of the Catholic Church. Following that, remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Let us pray. O Lord our God, we praise you always, and we thank you for your many blessings. Thank you for our freedoms that we enjoy in this country. We also thank you for the generosity of many people in our nation and locally who have reached out to others in their time of need during the recent economic challenges our nation and our local area have faced. We ask your blessing upon our gathering this evening. Guide our deliberations and discussions as we strive to serve our local community through city government. We ask you to continue to be with those in need and to provide for their needs through the continued generosity of your people. Help us as a city to reach out to Hispanic immigrants in our area and to all others in our area and to help them in their transition to life in our country and in our city. Help our nation in its current political struggles and challenges. Help opposing political factions in our nation to be civil with one another and to be open to meaningful compromise. Strengthen our city and our country. Help us always to live upon the ideals upon which our nation was founded. We ask this through your Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you for that moment of prayer, Father. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Brown? Mr. Brown? Mrs. Dickey?
Here.
Mr. Drummond?
Here.
Mr. Nestick?
Here.
Mr. Paparotis?
Here.
Mr. Whitehill?
Here.
Mr. Cushman? 6 members.
Mr. Whitehill?
Move to excuse Mr. Cushman.
All right, do I have a second? Mr. Paparotis? Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Brown?
Here.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Drummond?
Yes.
Mr. Nestick?
Yes.
Mr. Paparotis?
Yes.
Mr. Whitehill?
Yes.
All right, Mr. Cushman is excused. Everyone's received a copy of the minutes from the March 3rd, 2015 meeting. Are there any additions, corrections, or deletions to those minutes? Seeing none, they'll stand as approved. We have no petitions and remonstrances this evening. We have no receiving of visitors either. We'll move on then to report of city officials. Mayor Berlin.
Yes, today I attended a luncheon at the Salem Community Foundation. It was sponsored by Cheryl Railsback. She is the mother of Shane Detweiler. Shane Detweiler was born in Salem in 1977 and moved to Texas with his family. And he was killed in the line of duty as a deputy in the Chambers County Sheriff's Department on July 13th, 2009. Mrs. Railsback formed a foundation in memory of her son. Saw on the Salem Police Department website, Facebook, that we were in the process of purchasing body cams, and it struck home with her, and she arranged to come back, met with JT, and gave us a nice sizable donation toward the purchase of those body cams. I'd like to thank her and her son's foundation for that. I would also like to ask for an executive session tonight to discuss the purchase of property and pending litigation.
Is there a motion for that then? Mr. Nestick, is there a second? Mr. Drummond? Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Drummond?
Yes.
Mr. Nestick?
Yes.
Mr. Paparotis?
Yes.
Mr. Whitehill?
Yes.
6.
And what is that dealing with, so that we can make that a part of the public record?
Brooke?
I'm just pending litigation and purchase of real estate.
All right, and there's going to be no action being asked to be taken, is that correct?
Correct.
All right, so,
And,
go ahead.
I would answer any questions at this time, if anyone has any questions of me.
Any questions for the mayor? Seeing none with regards to that, as I've said so many times, we will wait till the conclusion of the regular meeting to adjourn into executive session. When we come out of that, it'll just be for purposes of adjourning the regular meeting. There'll be no action taken on anything that is discussed in executive session. Law Director, Attorney Zellers.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have no formal report this evening, other than to wish everybody a happy St. Patrick's Day. I think we're all a little bit Irish today in some fashion, some of us more than others, but that's all I have, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for the Law Director?
No questions.
Mr.
I
Brown.
wish everybody would speak up just a hair. I can hardly hear anybody over there this evening. Speak up a little bit.
We'll try to do that.
Thank you.
Thank
you, sir.
I think we're trying to get it out to everybody.
Thank you.
Any questions for the Law Director? Seeing none, the auditor has indicated that she has no report this evening. She'll be happy to answer any questions that council may have. Are there any questions for the auditor? None. Safety Service Director, Mr. Kenst.
Mr. President, I have no report this evening.
Utilities, no report, is that? Oh, sorry, Mr.
Yeah, I have
Brown.
one question, Mr. Kents. Could you speak up to the podium, please? So I can ask you a question. It's kind of hard to talk over my shoulder. Plus, I'm half deaf tonight. Thank you, sir. I hate to ask you to go up there like that, but 3 meetings ago, I asked you about a list of paving projects we're going to do in 2015 and the future, and you were kind enough to send me a copy, and then about a week or so later, you sent everybody on council a copy. But might I ask who prepared the list?
I did as well as the mayor.
Beg your pardon?
The mayor and I prepared that list.
Okay, do you plan on taking this list to the Street Sidewalks and Alley Committee to discuss it?
No, we don't.
Okay, I just want to make sure, because we've never had before.
No.
Thank you.
We'll keep everybody informed what we're going to do.
That's fine.
Okay.
Any other questions for Mr. Kents? Seeing none, Utilities has no report this evening?
No, we do not.
Parks Director, Mr. Faber.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have no report this evening, but I'll be glad to answer questions.
Any questions for Mr. Faber from council? Seeing none, thank you.
You're welcome.
Council Clerk, Mrs. Bricker.
Thank you, I don't have anything.
All right. Concludes the report of city officials. Move on to the report of standing committees. Finance, Mr. Cushman isn't here. Mr. Whitehill, is there anything that you need to report?
We do have a ordinance for possibly resolution. Bear with me one moment. We have a resolution to present tonight.
All right, that'll be resolution number 10.
Thank you.
Streets, alleys, and sidewalks, Mr. Paparotis.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have no report.
Utilities, Mr. Brown.
I have no report. My committee has not met, but I did attend the Utilities Commission meeting last week. Thank you.
Traffic and safety, Mr. Whitehill.
Thank you, Mr. President. My committee did meet. Traffic and Safety Committee met on Thursday, March 12th, 2015 at approximately 6:45. All committee members were present. The public was very well represented as well, many of which were rental property owners in Salem. The meeting began with comments from Sergeant Sheets in regards to the proposed ordinance regarding clandestine drug labs. Sergeant Sheets described the increasing health risk due to such properties as the frequency of discovery continues to rise. Specifically, he cited situations in which the property is not properly decontaminated and they are rented or sold to new occupants. Sergeant Sheets stated that the purpose is to be sure the properties are certified safe. He also stated that at times the police department has to remain on site until the outside contracted cleanup crew arrives. An ordinance, which is 080902-60, was also given to the committee, which states that the fire department already has the right to bill the property owner for expenses related to responding or standing by during cleanup of said properties. Councilman Cushman asked Sergeant Sheets if he had ever seen a property which could not be rehabilitated, to which Sergeant Sheets replied that he had not. Mr. Hoffmeister asked approximately how many houses were in question, to which Sergeant Sheets replied 12 to 13. Another citizen asked if cash was recovered from the lab, could that money be used to reimburse the property owner for the cleanup? This question will be referred to the law director. Another rental property owner, Mr. Kincaid, partially answered the question as well, with a comment that a portion of that could be filed as a claim directly with the judge in the case. Mr. Cahill cited existing provisions in the Ohio Revised Code which currently allow for penalties to be assessed to the properties. This also will be referred to the law director for review. More public discussion occurred, with the matter being referred back to the law director for possible revisions. The discussion then turned to a proposal to engage the Better Landlords Program for a municipal services study agreement. The agreement is currently proposed, suggests a not-to-exceed amount of $20,000. This study would include research and analysis of the area, identification of residential housing by property type, meaning rental or owner-occupied, analysis of the cost of providing services to each property type, including those of our safety forces. It would also include the development of a study database and presentation to City Council of the findings. I stated some statistics of the repeat offender properties in which an unusually high number of police calls or first responder calls were made. This was cited as a prime reason to engage the study and see what this is really costing the citizens. A very healthy discussion occurred with input from many residential or rental property owners. The spirit of the discussion resolved with a willingness of many rental property owners to participate in a community committee that could share successful ideas, develop a plan of how to resolve some repetitive issues, and methods of accountability for those property owners who are problematic. For this, the committee has voted unanimously to refer to committee of the whole for further discussion, input, and hopefully a committee to be created for that purpose. I will have more notes from the meeting prepared for that discussion in committee of the whole. The meeting was adjourned approximately 7:45 p.m. I want to make one other note, and that was Mrs. Cahill brought up a point about lack of detail on the meeting notice. I will take ownership of that issue as I'm the one that did not provide more detail, so that will be rectified. That's my report.
Very good, thank you. Rules and ordinances, Mrs. Dickey.
Yes, Rules and Ordinance Committee met March 5th at 6 p.m. All members were present. On the agenda first was the ordinance 1147.01A. This was the fourth meeting addressing this issue since the start of last year. And since our last meeting, Mr. Drummond and Mrs. Dickey, myself, visited the zoning office and attempted to determine the actual financial impact of the changes to this ordinance proposed, which was addition of the following statement. A permit is not required for interior construction, repairs, alterations, removal, or demolition that does not involve load-bearing walls, electrical, or plumbing. At the previous meeting, Mr. Morrissey, the zoning officer, testified that total permits for 2014 totaled $9,873.51 for 286 permits. He also testified that changes to this ordinance would cost the city $8,360 in fees and untold thousands of lost income tax revenue. Upon questioning about financial effects if contractors were excluded, Mr. Paymer answered no when asked if he believed taxes would be lost if contractors were omitted from this. Upon further questioning, the committee believed that the figures just didn't seem to add up. Maybe we weren't getting the right answers or asking the right questions, so we made the trip. After reviewing the issued permit report for 2014, I determined that only 7 to 8 permits would have been affected by this proposed change for a total of $198 to $225. Seeing the large difference between my figures and Mr. Morrissey's figures, I added all interior permits that could even remotely appear to be affected. These added up to $1,007. This included load-bearing walls, electrical, and plumbing projects as reported in committee. Mr. Drummond discussed adding definitions to explain the meaning of repairs, but decided to leave that for another meeting. Mr. Drummond made a motion to send the proposed changes to council, and Mr. Brown seconded the motion. It passed 3-0. Next on the agenda was a report by Virginia Grilly, chairperson of the Design Review Board, regarding projecting signs. She was asked to come up with standards of design for these signs in historic downtown, and she stated that sign designs would be permitted as long as they reflected the period of the building and the nature of the business. This review was decided to be used for all new and replaced signs. And after discussion and questions from visitors present, a motion was made by Mr. Drummond to add 1195.05.3 to state all new signs or replacement signs in District C3 must apply for a permit from the Salem Zoning Office. In addition, sign design plans must be submitted and approved by the Design Review Board to ensure standards in the historic district are upheld. And these ordinances will be subject to any and all building and zoning changes in the future. Upon submission to the law director, he added, just to clarify, such approval shall be issued by a certificate of appropriateness pursuant to City Ordinance 1149.08, so that all our odds and ends would be taken care of. Mr. Brown seconded the motion, and it passed 3-0. Mrs. Dickey read a prepared statement regarding expectations on future info provided to the committee and the circumstances that resulted in additional meetings and time spent on these ordinances. The meeting was adjourned. We have 2 ordinances that need numbers tonight.
All right, one will be number 11, and the second will be number 12. 11 is, and I had provided to the press my copy of the ordinances. 11 is, it's the dealing with 1147.
Permits for interior work.
And 12 is that dealing with 1195. Anything further than Mrs. Dickey? Is that all?
That's it.
All right. Parks, Mr. Drummond.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Parks Committee has not met. I do have a meeting scheduled at the moment for Thursday, March 26th, 6 p.m. I've been informed tonight there's also a meeting by Union Gas here at that time. I may reach out to my committee to see, they indicated they'd both be available on the Wednesday, the 25th, so I might reschedule that, given that I don't know who might want to come to our committee. It's not as exciting as Union Gas, but they might want to attend both, and therefore I might consider moving mine the day before, but I'll keep everybody informed.
All right, very good.
Thank you.
Economic Development, Mr. Nestic.
The Economic Development Committee met at 6:30 on March 10th. All committee members were present. The committee met to learn about a proposal for downtown revitalization offered by Ginger Grilli and to hear a quarterly update from the Sod Center Director, Mike Mancuso. Ms. Grilli began by presenting a proposal from Town Center Associates. This group conducts analysis and business development for historic downtowns. She contrasted the work proposed with the project Seedbase. Seedbase is an information platform for people considering locating in Salem, whereas their database is more of a business development and marketing platform for historic downtowns. Normally, the database program costs $3,500 to $5,000. They're offering it free for the first year. Their analysis also offers review of current ordinances and suggestions on ordinance revisions to enhance and promote the historic downtown. They need $7,500 to get started for the first 6 months. After the first 6 months, they can adjust objectives for the second 6 months, which would be an additional $7,500. Ms. Grilli asked to allocate $40,000 to the Sod Center as an umbrella fiduciary organization because they think they need 2 years and extra money to determine what is needed. Mr. Mancuso confirmed that the Sod Center Board has approved being the fiscal agent for the funds. Mr. Drummond asked about the company's incentive to market downtown Salem since Town Center Associates represents a number of historic downtowns. The answer was that they don't market one over the other, but collect information on all communities they represent and present it to seekers of certain kinds of locations. Mr. Drummond further asked if their site for Salem can be linked to Seedbase for additional information. The answer was not sure yet, but we'll look into it. Mr. Whitehill asked how their efforts promote people to upgrade their buildings. Ms. Grilli said the ordinances they suggest help in that regard. They target buildings and people that are issues and try to work with them. If not, then the ordinances are applied as leverage. Worcester was used as an example of where community, municipal, and peer pressure help turn things around. Mr. Mancuso added that the work done in other areas was a foundation for a turnaround of those communities. The matter will be referred to a committee of the whole to discuss the project and financing for the project. Mr. Mancuso then gave a quarterly update for the Sod Center. His update included progress with the City of Salem award of $400,000 for an EPA grant, the Appalachian Regional Commission grants for sewer improvements, Holiday Inn Express, the East TIF Zone Senior Living Project. He also reported on activities including startup assistance, including a bakery, a construction company, a 24-hour daycare, an automotive warehouse, an indoor pistol range, and a cafe and game store. Existing retention and expansion assistance included the Holiday Inn, the Timber Lanes, sourcing potential leases, print shop expansion, representing Salem and the county on a 10-county export project with YSU and the Small Business Development Center, and helping a local manufacturer to connect with export resources. Attraction activities included a machine shop that's relocating to Salem, working on a new website with full available property database for sale and lease, opened a new Facebook, LinkedIn, and Google Plus site, also working to interconnect with outside resources like Team Neo. He then spoke on promotional activities and strategic planning efforts whereby, among other objectives pursued in industrial development, the Sod Center is working with the Small Business Development Center and the mayor to fulfill the city's strategic planning efforts begun last year. After Mr. Mancuso's update, the meeting was adjourned at 7:20 p.m.
All right. Anything further then?
There's nothing further. Any questions? I'm happy to entertain.
Any questions for Mr. Nestic? Seeing none, committee of the whole then, Mr. Nestic.
The committee of the whole has not met, but if there are no objections, I'd like to schedule a meeting for next week on the 24th at 6:30, if possible. The topic will be, right now, the only topic will be to discuss the Town Center Associates project presented by Ms. Grilly. $6:30?
Does that work for everyone?
No problem.
Uh,
All right, then, March 24th at 6:30. Anything else with committee of the whole, Mr. Nestic?
That is all at this time.
All right, very good. That concludes the report of standing committees. Move on then to second and third readings of ordinances and resolutions. There are none. Move on then to introduction of ordinances and resolutions. Mr. Whitehill.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to suspend council rules so that Resolution 10 may be considered tonight.
Is there a second on that? Mr. Brown? Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Drummond?
Yes.
Mr. Nestic?
Yes.
Mr. Paparotis?
Yes.
Mr. Whitehill?
Yes.
All right, council rules are suspended. Mr. Whitehill.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to suspend statutory rules so that ordinance or Resolution 10 may be given all three readings tonight.
All right, is there a second on that? Mrs. Dickey? Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Whitehill?
Yes.
Mr. Paparotis?
Yes.
Mr. Nestic?
Yes.
Mr. Drummond?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Brown? Mr. Brown?
Yes.
All right, statutory rules are suspended. Mr. Whitehill.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the clerk read by title only Resolution 10 for passage this evening.
All right, Madam Clerk, would you please read resolution number 10 by title only for its first, second, and third readings this evening? Emergency clause on that? With emergency clause.
Being a resolution authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to participate in the Ohio Department of Transportation contracts under the Cooperative Purchasing Program for the purchase of machinery, materials, supplies, including road salt or other articles pursuant to the Ohio Revised Code, Section 5513.01B, and declaring an emergency.
All right, is there any discussion with regards to resolution number 10? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll on resolution number 10 for passage this evening?
Mr. Nestic?
Yes.
Mr. Drummond?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Whitehill?
Yes.
Mr. Paparotis?
Yes.
6 yeas.
All right, resolution number 10 passes with 6 yeas. Mrs. Dickey.
I would ask, Mr. President, that you have the clerk read ordinance 11 by title only for its first reading tonight.
All right, Madam Clerk, would you please read ordinance number 11 by title only for its first reading this evening?
Being an ordinance amending Section 1147.01A of Chapter 1147 of Title III of Part 11 of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Salem regarding permits and fees.
All right. Mrs. Dickey.
Would you please ask the clerk to read ordinance 12 for its first reading tonight by title only?
Madam Clerk, would you please read ordinance number 12 by title only for its first reading this evening?
Being an ordinance amending Section 1195.05C of Chapter 1195 of Title VII of Part 11 of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Salem regarding general requirements for all signs and districts.
Thank you. And those will go on to the Planning Commission then,
Yes.
prior to coming back to council. That is all of the introduction of ordinances and resolutions at this time. I move on to the pleasure of council. Mr. Paparotis.
Thank you, Mr. President. Salem lost a longtime friend and business owner, Jerry Holhottle, and he'll be missed. Thank you.
Mr. Brown.
Thank you very much. Excuse me. As most people know, I held a meeting last Tuesday night, March 10th, at the Courtyard downtown, and I sent an email to the Salem News. I would like to read the draft of that email at this time. That's what happened to my meeting. Our first meeting of 2015 was held downtown on March 10th at the Courtyard Square. This session was originally scheduled for residents of Ward 2. I had invited Salem Police Chief J.T. Panzot to attend and participate because of my concern for meth labs and drugs in the Second Ward. The meeting was announced at 2 meetings of City Council and in a letter to the Salem News. Our drug problem is not restricted to my ward, so I asked everyone in Salem to attend. Several days before, Chief Panzot informed me Detective Sergeant John Sheets would be attending. Officer Sheets is the Salem police officer assigned to the Columbiana County Drug Task Force. 24 people dodged the raindrops to come to the Courtyard Square. The green tables and chairs were arranged for our comfort. Scott and Lisa Cahill offered free coffee. A large table was made available for Chief Panzot and Sergeant Sheets. When you get to be my age, you lose some of the ability to listen and take notes at the same time, but here goes. First of all, I informed those present that I was going to bypass our Second Ward meeting. However, anyone with a concern or problem could call me or send me an email. They would get handled. I then introduced Chief Panzot and Sergeant Sheets. They explained what is required of our Salem Police Department and the Columbiana County Drug Task Force when it comes to drug problems. Like everyone else present, I was amazed about the time element between thinking there is a drug problem and being able to do something. Laws have to be followed, and the process can take a long time. Moving too quickly can mean ending up with empty hands. Both Chief Panzot and Officer Sheets told us how meth and other drugs are manufactured, what to watch for in our neighborhoods. Many tools of the trade are simple plastic bottles. Several items used to make drugs are sitting under my kitchen sink. Accidents can happen when making drugs. Did you know a new very potent drug can be made from marijuana? We're also told that cocaine is history and heroin is the new brain killer. Drug dealers want power, and they need buyers for their products. Dealers compete for new turf, control of neighborhoods and entire cities such as Salem and the rest of Columbiana County. Cartels, drug gangs, and dealers believe the risk of getting caught is worth the enormous profit. A question and answer period followed the informative comments of Chief Panzot and Sergeant Sheets. One important question was, who do I contact if I believe a drug problem exists in my neighborhood? Answer, call the local police department or the Columbiana Drug Task Force, then do nothing. Let them take over right then. If you had attended this meeting, you might not have slept well that night. 24 people walked out into the rain at 8 p.m. They were fully aware of the extent of the drug problem in Salem and the county. Does a dealer live next to you? Is your son or daughter a user? Is a meth lab in the house on the corner or a few blocks away? You can continue to ignore the city drug problem. If you do, you're part of the problem. As long as there are people buying, there will be people willing to sell. Eliminate demand, and the sellers will leave Salem. My thanks to Salem Police Chief J.T. Panzot, Sergeant John Sheets for being my guest. Also to 4th Ward Council Member Cindy Baranzi Dickey and former Council Member Mary Ann Jaracki for being there and asking questions. Salem Beautification Committee members Karen Carter and Jennifer Brown also added to our discussions. Special thanks to Mr. Scott Cahill and his wife Lisa for allowing me the use of the beautiful courtyard area. Thank you very much. That's
that all? Thank you, Mr. Brown.
I afforded that time, thank you.
Mrs. Dickey.
I just want to say thank you to Councilman Brown. That was a very, very informative meeting. I really got a lot out of it. I would say it was one of the best meetings I've been to in the time I've been on council, and we've had a lot of good meetings. Also, I'd like to say Happy St. Patrick's Day to everybody.
Mr. Nestick.
I echo Ms. Dickey. I was impressed with Mr. Brown's meeting. It sounds like it was very worthwhile. I also want to join the mayor in extending a thank you to Shane Detweiler's Foundation for their donation to our police force. Everything we can do to help them will help with the drug problem that Mr. Brown has so rightfully emphasized.
All right, thank you. Mr. Drummond.
Thank you, Mr. President. I too echo Mr. Nestick and the mayor's comments about the Shane Detweiler Foundation and their contribution to our police forces. And I thank Mr. Brown for bringing up this topic and talking about it and having the meeting about it. But I also want to point out that we are, our police department and the county drug task force has, I think, put the drug labs, et cetera, on notice that they're not going to stand by idly and let it continue. You're reading about it in the paper because we are doing things about it. And I believe they're going to continue doing things about it until such time as those parties decide Salem's not the place to be. Not sure where they're going to go, and I frankly don't care, as long as they get out of our town. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Whitehill.
And a little bit to that point, I want to thank those who attended the traffic and safety meeting as well, because when the community is involved and engaged, that always makes things better in the process and creates more input. So I want to say thank you in that regard as well.
All right, I would just wish everybody a happy St. Patrick's Day. That'll conclude our regular meeting, and we will adjourn into executive session at this time. Thank you.